South African Banking Risk Information Center, or the South African Banking Risk and Information Center, says ATM bombings rose by 23% in 2022. The SABRIC report has also revealed that despite activation of the dye stain technology to curb explosive attacks, criminals are able to bypass that move and remove the ink stains from banknotes. We're now joined by Nischal Mewalall, CEO of the South African Banking Risk Information Center, to expand on the report, which covers also a number of incidents when it comes to the banking sector. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's talk about the report overall, or maybe start there in terms of why it is so significant and why you take a look at instances not only such as the ones that we have mentioned, but card fraud as well, for instance.
Yeah. Hi, good morning to you, Duduzu, and good morning to the listeners, to the viewers as well. Thank you for having me on the show and allowing us an opportunity to discuss a little bit of the report that we released. So you're correct. This report, as I've said before, contains important information, not just about the incidents that are taking place that's affecting our communities and society, but also because this report coincides with the FATF grey listing of South Africa, and we want to be able to highlight how these crimes are actually feeding into the discourse of money laundering and the generation of proceeds of crime in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at the category of contact crime, which we have broken down per province. Explain that to our viewers and the trends that you have seen.
Sure. Well, one of the most important things we've noted is the changes in the way ATM bombings are taking place in the country. Clearly, Gauteng is the epicenter of almost all the attacks that are taking place in South Africa. And in the last year, we had more than 441 incidents that generated more than 45 million rands worth of proceeds of crime. Largely, these attacks take place in two forms. It's either the use of explosives, which is the preferred option and which seems to be yielding the biggest financial gains for these perpetrators. And then the second one has got to be the grinding of ATMs. So they're taking a grinder and they cut out the machine or cut out the technological aspects that prevent you from accessing it. So grinding is a little bit more complicated. It requires you to have more time. And as you see, with a lot of load shedding taking place, it disrupts the ability to be able to effectively monitor and respond to these incidents. So certainly grinding, we've noted an uptake on the grinding aspect as well. But what we have noted, and just to correct the statement, we did note that when dye stain technology is activated, the criminals are opting to still take dye stain notes. We're not really saying that they have found a way to clean the note. We're unsure of that as yet. What we do know is that these notes are not being thrown away, but rather they prefer to be kept by these criminals. And logically, there's got to be a reason why they are associating themselves to being in possession of these notes, and that requires further investigation. I think the other aspect of the ATM bombings that's a concern is the evolution in the way the crime is taking place. There's clearly a nexus between the explosives that are used in illegal mining, and as well as these days there's kidnappings associated to the ATM bombings, because often the security companies' personnel are kidnapped and then these perpetrators purport to be part of the security teams that are looking after the devices. I think another aspect to note is that there has been a decline in robberies that take place of customers as they get into the branches. Certainly that can be attributed to the good work between the police services and the banks, because there were lots of energy put into identifying the syndicates that were behind this, and quite a number of arrests were made in the different provinces.
In 2022, how much was lost due to ATM bombings?
2022 told us that at least 45 million cash went to ATM bombing. So certainly this very violent method of attack pays significantly, pays handsomely. And I think that the concern now is often when these ATMs are being blown up, they don't just cause an issue of financial loss. That's not the core concern. But the core concern is the safety of people around that area. And many of the ATMs are positioned in malls, or they're positioned in service stations. And you can imagine a bomb going off in a service station. What kind of risks could there be, not just for the person near the ATM, but in the surrounding area as well. So these are the kinds of things that we've got to take into consideration now when we think about where we're positioning these ATMs.
In contact crimes, we've also seen some Bonnie and Clyde-style bank robberies, not in terms of couples, but in terms of where maybe smaller outlets are concerned. Explain that to our viewers, where the Western Cape was the province with the highest number of reported bank robbery incidents.
Yes, look, again, even though it's a high number of bank robbery incidents, we got to look at it in the broader context of what's going on. There has been a significant decline over the last 20 years in terms of bank robberies themselves. And a lot can be attributed to, logically, investigations that identify the syndicates and make the arrests, but also it changes in the way the security situation works in banks themselves. But every now and again, you do get an upsurge, and this is what we've seen in the Western Cape. I think that from a customer perspective, customers just need to continue to remain vigilant. I mean, the key issue is not being able to go into a bank and execute a transaction, but the concern is around how do people behave around the infrastructure that sits outside, like around the ATMs and things of that nature, because that's where we're seeing some of the changes in the dynamics. But the other aspect that is really worth diving into is digital crime. And if you're keen, we could speak about that as well.
Yes, please.
So digital crime is the crime relating to banking fraud, but that arises on the digital platform. So chances are you're using digital banking. It's the banking apps that we all have on our phones. The other one is when we're talking to the laptops that we bank via laptops, and the third one is the mobile banking aspect. So these can be basketed into digital crimes. Now there were more than 16,000 successful digital crime incidents last year, and the total loss over there was in excess of 363 million rands to these fraudsters. And this is gross loss. So this is a staggering amount of money in the hands of the fraudsters. And keep in mind that this is direct losses that are attributed to losses to the customer, and then in some instances the bank itself. To be clear, these fraudsters have not been successful in hacking banking apps. That's not how it works. They have been successful in manipulating you and I to be able to give our data across to them. Largely, three techniques are used. It's called phishing, vishing, and smishing. Vishing is voice. They call you up. They purport to be a member of the bank, trying to convince you to give them OTPs because they want to execute a transaction on the back end or harvest your data. The second one is phishing. It comes through via an email, and it takes various forms, either a compromised email or click a link. And the last one then's got to be the smishing, which is an SMS. Many of us would get an SMS, and they would tell us, we need to update our KYC information. Please click this link, whatever it may be. So as we go through these processes, many people fall victim. I mean, there were 16,000 incidents. So people fall victim, hand over this data, and that's when they become the victims of these crimes. So certainly when we look at the proceeds that are generated out of these crimes, online banking, which accounted for 26% of all the incidents, but it was also 47% of the total loss. So that's where people need to be really careful about, what they share, what they believe about what a perpetrator is saying. I think South Africans are a little bit too trusting, and that's why we have such high incidents.
Sure. I heard of phishing before, but I've never heard of vishing and smishing until going through the report. You spoke of being vigilant a little bit earlier on, and the report also speaks about card fraud. How many times has your mother told you to keep your personal belongings close to you and safe? But just how much of it also has got to do with inside jobs?
Well, that's a good question. So let's pick up a little bit on the card fraud plan. So there's a very interesting. South Africa has been one of the first countries to really exploit the use of chip and pin, and chip and pin has totally changed the security dimension of card fraud. So when you look at card fraud inside South Africa, it's a lot lower in terms of the number of incidents and amounts lost than what takes place on the outside of the country. And that's because within South Africa, the merchants have to sign agreements which require them to use the chip and PIN capability. In other words, you've got to validate the transaction before they pay. But when you perform a transaction outside the country, or even within the borders, but you're paying a vendor outside the country, they don't go through the same process. So recovery outside the country is simpler, if I put it to you like that, because for as long as they don't abide by the rules, they pick up the risk. In South Africa, it's quite different. You validate, and if you validate, then the money is paid. If you don't validate, there's no transaction taking place. So credit card fraud is under control within the Republic itself. The area of concern is your debit card. Now, debit card and paying with debit card is as good as paying with cash. And so the moment you execute a transaction to the incorrect person, or fraudsters get your information and are able to access your debit card, that money is as good as gone the moment it takes place, because it's like you losing cash. Once that money is gone, it's going to be really hard to recover physical cash itself. So debit card, we got to be careful with. In terms of inside jobs on cards, that's a very difficult thing within a bank to be successful with, because of the security dimensions that are associated with the way cards are and their BIN numbers are handled inside the institution. Everything is compartmentalized. Often the numbers are digitized. There's no human beings allocating codes. It's a pretty complex system to try and beat. So it's easier to manipulate a person on the outside rather than try and break the system on the inside.
Okay. Very quickly for us, Nischal, the report also takes a look at a worldwide perspective, I guess. And so with all these incidents, whether they're quite violent or whether they're doing it in the comfort of their own homes or wherever they are, what do we look like in comparison to the rest of the world?
That's a difficult one. The reason being is that you don't really find publications that give you a global view. The areas of concern, sometimes you see publications, is that South Africa is sitting in the top 5 when it comes to incidents of cybercrime. And if you had to look at all the digital crime we were speaking about, certainly that would take us into the category. The other one that South Africa stands out on is the high number of fraudulent activities that take place in terms of application fraud, and that could be many forms. And that's because very often too many counterfeit documentation like ID books, permits, passports are in circulation that allows these kinds of crimes to take place because we cannot validate them. And we're not really clear about who's in the country and who's out. So hard to place South Africa at a particular level, but safe to say when it comes to cybersecurity, cybersecurity risks, we're up there in the top 5.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Nischal Mewalall is the CEO at the South African Banking Risk Information Center.